Before we jump into today's episode, I want to tell you about something new and something cool that we just made for you. I wrote it myself. Now, here's my assumption. If you are listening to this podcast, it probably means that you want to build long-term wealth with a rental real estate portfolio, and you would probably like to do it with some creative financing. And as I talk to people who want to do that, I know a lot of questions come up, and I thought there's really no great single resource that really captures the entire picture of how that works. But I have solved that problem because I have written a new PDF that is just for you, and it's called the Step-by-Step Guide to Buying Your First or Next Rental Property Without Relying on a Lender to Approve You for a Loan. Like I said, I wrote this thing myself, and if I do say so myself, it's pretty thorough. And in this, you're going to learn a few things. I'm going to teach you about the 3 key strategies to find and negotiate quality off-market real estate deals that nobody else even knows are for sale. I'm going to teach you about what I call the yeses framework for getting off-market sellers to accept your offers. And then I'm also going to teach you the 11 simple steps that you need to take to get your first or your next deal accepted without needing to go to a bank and apply for a loan and just hope that they give it to you. So if you would like to get this free downloadable PDF, just go to rentalwealthguide.com and you can download it right now. rentalwealthguide.com and get your download of the step-by-step guide to buying your first or next rental property without relying on a lender to approve you for a loan. Now, on with the show.
Successful real estate investing isn't all about we buy houses and motivated sellers. That's the lowbrow approach, and it gives real estate investing a slimy reputation. Gross. There is a better way, a more genuine, human approach. We are thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, and this is sleaze-free real estate investing.
This is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur. Welcome to episode number 18 of Sleaze-Free Real Estate Investing, a show for those of us who never felt at home in the we buy houses crowd. In this show, we take a stand against what we call the lowbrow approach, the mainstream guru seminar distressed seller approach that ends up giving real estate investors a slimy reputation. And instead, we discuss the strategies, tactics, and philosophies that we call the thoughtful way, an enlightened approach to real estate entrepreneurship that focuses on constantly sharpening the sophisticated real estate entrepreneur's 3 most critical capabilities: seller relations skills, deal architecture skills, and opportunity vision. When all 3 of these capabilities are successfully in motion, you can make an excellent living today and build long-term wealth while creating value for everybody that you touch along the way. Show notes for today's episode are at www.thoughtfulre.com/E18. Please do yourself and do us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast app. Now, in the last episode, we discussed the 2 different strategies for achieving financial freedom through cash flow. And we're going to continue talking about rental properties, which is related to last week's topic as well. So please go back and listen to that if you haven't already. And in today's main course, we're going to continue this conversation, and we're going to discuss the most amazing part of owning rental properties that nobody talks about. But first, as always, a little bit of food for thought, because as thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs, as trees, we love to feed our minds with things to think about. And today we're thinking about thinking. We're thinking about something called thinking time. Now, this is obviously, as you can tell by just the name of it, a perfect idea for us trees. And I've been doing this myself since learning about it. Now, a few weeks ago, I was at my Genius Network session in Phoenix, Arizona, and we had a guest speaker who was Keith Cunningham. Keith Cunningham, interestingly, very interestingly, is the real rich dad. Apparently, Robert Kiyosaki once sort of acknowledged that there were 2 people who had inspired the real rich dad character in the Rich Dad, Poor Dad books, and that Keith Cunningham was one of those people. So I'm sitting here listening to Keith Cunningham talk about something that he describes as thinking time. Now, thinking time is outlined in Keith's newest book, which is called The Road Less Stupid. I'll put this link in the show notes. And Joe Polish, the guy who runs Genius Network, called this the best business book he'd read in a decade, and I've been reading it too and just enjoying the heck out of it myself. The book is about the idea that oftentimes the biggest success you can have is actually avoiding dumb mistakes. And so the book talks a lot about the types of dumb mistakes that people in business tend to make and how to avoid them. And he goes on to sort of explain, like right at the beginning of the book, that one of the key ways to avoid those dumb mistakes, dumb tax as he calls it, avoid paying the dumb tax, is to do thinking time. And you think things through in advance and identify your blind spots. Interestingly, Keith actually has an extensive real estate background in which he paid a large dumb tax by his own acknowledgement at one point. And, in real estate, we can hear people use the expression that sometimes the best deal you do is the one you didn't do. I don't know if you've heard that before, but I've certainly heard that before too. And it really just goes to show that sometimes avoiding a deal can be the most profitable thing you could do if you don't step on that landmine that could have really sort of taken you down or taken you out. Thinking time is a regular and routine discipline. It's about having a quality question and creating a lot of solutions to this quality question. It's like the mind is remarkably good at answering the questions that you put in front of it. So it's actually really dangerous to put badly formed questions in front of the mind, because the mind will do a very good job of answering those badly formed questions. For instance, if you ask yourself, why am I so fat? Then that you're putting this question in front of your mind about being fat. Whereas if the question you ask yourself were, how could I routinely make better food choices? That's a very different way to frame the same type of question in a way that's going to create more positive answers and positive results, because the way the question is framed to the power of your mind. So you have to make sure that the questions you put in front of yourself in thinking time are really good quality questions. Keith recommends doing thinking time for 45 minutes with a timer, going someplace without any distraction at all. Certainly no email. You're certainly not sitting in front of your computer. It's just you and a blank notebook, a nice pen, and one or two related questions on a topic. He even recommends having a specific place that you go, that you don't sit in this chair really any other time except when you're doing thinking time, or you don't use this pen or this notebook anytime except when you're doing thinking time. So it's kind of a dedicated ritual. And you pose this 1 to 2 questions that are related to yourself, and you just spend the 45 minutes coming up with as many answers and solutions as you possibly can without worrying about their quality, without editing them, just coming up with a big brain dump of very focused solutions. Your brain is only thinking about this one issue at this time. So I encourage you to incorporate thinking time into your life and your business too. I encourage you to grab the book, The Road Less Stupid. And again, I will put that in the show notes as well. But I think you'll find that the problems that are on your mind are more manageable, and that there are indeed a lot of solutions, and probably some very good solutions, if you do this thinking time exercise and you do it well. I think it will really soften the blow of some of the problems you feel like you might be facing. That is today's food for thought.
Real estate investors get so caught up in which strategy to use, what the best way to do flipping or wholesaling is, or to make money with this or with that, or the shortcuts and the tips and the techniques. But we often forget that all deals have one thing in common, and that thing is that there's a human on the other end of the transaction, especially when you're doing business the thoughtful way and working directly with sellers. And if you could master the art of working with those people in a way that gets you to a yes that you need from them and gives you both a win, then it's going to transform your entire business. And that's why I've created a brand new webinar that I want to invite you to attend. It's called How to Earn an Incredible Living and Build Lasting Wealth in Real Estate by Mastering the Uncommon Art of Seller Relation Skills without working harder or doing more deals. What you'll learn in this free webinar presentation is primarily based on 3 secrets. Secret number 1 is how to easily uncover the hidden motivations of every seller. Secret number 2 is how to confidently meet face-to-face with a seller and come across as a trustworthy pro. And secret number 3 is how to market to sellers in a way that makes the phone ring and helps you buy properties that nobody else even knows are for sale. So come join us on this free webinar. To register, all you have to do is visit www.sellerrelationsmastery.com, sellerrelationsmastery.com, and we hope to see you on the webinar.
All right, moving on to the main course of today's episode. And today's topic on thoughtful real estate entrepreneurship is what I call the most amazing part of owning rental properties that nobody talks about. Now, today we're going to have a little bit of a different topic than some things we normally discuss. We're going to get a little bit into economics here. We're going to get a little bit into the discussion of debt. Now, I'm not an economist, and I have no desire to stand up and debate somebody about whether debt is good or bad, or the definition of good debt versus bad debt, or whether you should or should not have debt. I just want to illustrate a really interesting phenomenon and tell you how I think about it and how I'm incorporating it into my business. So you may ask yourself, that why is this a topic for thoughtful real estate entrepreneurs? This isn't a show on economics. Well, it's because thoughtful real estate entrepreneurship isn't just about how we work with sellers and how we relate to people. That's a big part of it. But it's also about how we thoughtfully choose to structure our portfolios, how we deliberately and very intentionally use debt or don't use debt in certain scenarios, how we structure everything with intent and purpose and not just sort of by happenstance. It's about how we are willing as trees and able to be thoughtful enough to see that there are other perspectives about what we are actually doing, not just in the short term, but over the long term as well. And this is a story about being thoughtful about the long term of our real estate endeavors and giving you some new considerations to think about as you put together your long-term plan as well as your short-term plan. So I want to tell you just a quick story. When I was a kid, my parents divorced when I was 8, and I was very close as a result to my grandparents. I was very close to both sets of grandparents. I was lucky to have all 4 of them, but I was especially close to my maternal grandparents, and we lived very near them, and I was very, very close with my grandfather, my grandpa. And when I was a kid, of course, my grandpa would tell me stories, and I remember, I think about his hamburger story, or his hamburger comments and anecdote a lot. And he would often say, you know, when I was your age, we would go down to the local cafe, the local grill, and I could get the best burger you've ever seen in your life for 5 cents. So my grandpa was born in 1927. So, you know, when he was my age at that point, it was probably 1935 to 1940-ish, somewhere right in there. And of course, I would say 5 cents. That to me, you know, even as like a 10-year-old, even in the late 1980s, seemed ridiculously cheap. But to him, in the moment, as a kid, it wasn't cheap. It maybe wasn't expensive, but it was just the appropriate price for a hamburger at that time. And now as an adult, right, with grandkids, he can look back on that and see, oh yeah, 5 cents, that seems like nothing compared to what that same burger would cost today. But in the moment, 5 cents was the price that you paid for an excellent burger in his childhood. Over the years, my grandpa would tell me more similar stories, you know, similar kind of theme. He would tell me about the first house that they bought, you know, and it was around $5,000 in about 1950. To them, paying $5,000 for a house was a ton of money in 1950. You know, saving up like $750 for a down payment was a major ordeal, a major accomplishment to be able to save up that amount of money. And so their mortgage, you know, that would have been around $4,250 seemed to them at the time like an astronomical figure, because at the time, relative to what was going on then, that was a large amount of money. Now, to us today, those numbers are laughable. I mean, I'd kill to have a mortgage balance of just $4,250, right? Some people have payments on a monthly basis of $4,250, not entire mortgages, monthly payments. But relative to the time, it was normal and average for my grandpa. So today, a mortgage of $4,250 would be no big deal, right? Because incomes are much higher than they were at that time as well. I looked up what the average household income in 1950 was, and it says that it was about $3,300 a year. $3,300 in 1950. By 2019, Google says it's over $60,000. I thought maybe it'd be even a little bit higher than that, but even at that, that's 20x what it was in 1950. And even my grandfather himself in the early 2000s, when he was still with us, would look back at that $4,250 mortgage and feel like it was small. I mean, he would remember feeling it felt big at the time, of course, right? But from his modern 2000s perspective, he would feel like it was no big deal in hindsight, especially compared to the mortgages that he would have later in life. He would understand that his perspective had changed. So what is this phenomenon called? Well, of course, it's called inflation, right? And you know that. We all know about inflation. And we kind of tend to think of inflation as being defined as, quote, things get more expensive over time. But what inflation really is not so much the price of things going up. It's the purchasing power of the dollar that we use to buy those things going down over time. So for instance, a house isn't 50 times more valuable to humans today than it was in 1950. It might cost 50 times more, but it's not 50 times more valuable, right? It's not like in 1950 we said, we humans, we kind of like living indoors, but it's no big deal. And in 2019, we're like, yes, we humans must live indoors. No, we've always wanted to live indoors. The value of a house in terms of the value that we place on it hasn't changed, but the amount of dollars we have to exchange to get it has changed. A gallon of milk today isn't 50 times more desirable to human beings than it was in 1950. It's just that if you want to buy that house or buy that gallon of milk, the number of dollars that you have to trade for it has increased 50x over time. So, inflation, which, by the way, the Federal Reserve intentionally regulates to ensure that inflation happens and has done that for the past 100 plus years. Inflation is the declining purchasing power of the dollar. That's really what inflation is. And that means, and this brings us to our first really big point. What that means is that tomorrow's dollars, not literally necessarily tomorrow, but dollars in the future, will be less valuable than today's dollars. Just like today's dollars are less valuable than the dollars at the time my grandpa bought his house. When he bought his first house, $5,000 would buy you a whole place, a whole house. In 2019, $5,000 would barely buy me the furnace inside that house. And you extrapolate that forward, say it's 2075, who knows? It's likely that $5,000 might be the cost of a pack of light bulbs for that house. And that statement there, that in 2075, a pack of light bulbs might cost $5,000. Well, that sounds crazy to us today, I know. But think about my grandpa. Wouldn't he have said the same thing if someone in 1950 had told him that his grandson, 60, 70 years later, would gladly buy a house in 2019 for $500,000, 100x what he paid for the same house? I literally live in a house built in 1927, so it could have been literally the same house. Wouldn't he have said the same thing? That's crazy, and he would have not believed that person if in 1950 they'd said, hey, your grandson Jeff will gladly buy a house in 2019 for $500,000. As an important and extremely related side note, if you think on this idea, you'll notice that when people are talking about real estate specifically, people often confuse appreciation with inflation. Appreciation is the actual utility value of something increasing. It's now more useful. People want it more, etc. So they're willing to pay more for it. That's what appreciation is, when somebody places more value on something than they used to. Inflation, on the other hand, is just simply the amount of dollars that you have to exchange to get something going up. And it's funny because people make this mistake, or they confuse appreciation with inflation. Only, it seems to me, in real estate. Yeah, it's funny that the cost of milk is much higher than it was 20 years ago, but you don't really hear anybody saying milk is appreciating. They would say the cost of milk is going up, or inflation is affecting the price of milk. They wouldn't say milk is appreciating. However, back to the big point. Tomorrow's dollars in the future, will be less valuable than today's dollars. And when you're a borrower, that's a very powerful force in your favor. That's where we get into why this is a real estate topic and why it's a thoughtful real estate entrepreneur's thing to think about. Now, with real estate, when you buy a property with a mortgage, you are taking on debt, right? And that debt is denominated in today's dollar value. But when is it that you pay that mortgage and pay it off? Well, it depends on the mortgage, of course, but let's just take the most standard basic mortgages, or a 30-year fixed amortized loan. You start paying it today, you pay a little tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and you might finish paying it off in, say, 30 years. So to state that differently, though, when you buy a property with a mortgage, you lock in debt in today's dollars, denominated in today's dollars, but you pay it off with tomorrow's dollars. And tomorrow's dollars are worth less than today's dollars, as we've just discussed. So if I can pay off my loan with dollars that are less valuable, instead of using the ones that I have that are more valuable, I will gladly do that any day of the week. You see, because both debt and the asset that the debt is associated with, right, the property and the loan, both the debt and the asset are subject to inflation. But the debt and the asset are two different things, and inflation affects the two different things differently, almost kind of in the opposite way. So let's just take a look at what does inflation do to both. For the asset itself, the property, inflation makes it cost more, right? This is what people are calling appreciation, but it's very much inflation. You buy your house for $250,000, and 10 years later you sell it for $325,000 without any real change to the property itself. That is the effect of inflation on the asset. Okay. How about the debt itself? For debt, inflation makes the debt feel like less to you. Remember my grandpa? He was freaking out about his $4,250 mortgage back in 1950 when he got it. But by 1980, let's say, when he was ready to pay it off, it seemed like a very small loan to him. And I'm not talking about him having paid the balance down and now the balance was small. I mean that literally $4,250 in his 1980 eyes and perspective was nothing compared to what $4,250 felt like in his 1950 eyes and perspective. So what this means is that your property continues to appreciate, quote, I'm using air quotes there, continues to appreciate or inflate, and it goes up in value over time. It goes up in dollar denominations over time, while the debt continues to feel less and less ominous because relatively it feels like an increasingly small number. And again, we're not talking about it becoming an increasingly small number because you're paying the balance down. That's a separate function all by itself. I just mean that the balance of that original loan in the future is going to seem like a much smaller number than it did when you signed up for it in the first place. And while we can't guarantee that the dollar will continue its path of inflation, or in that case, as it relates to the dollar, it's really depreciation of the dollar, devaluation of the dollar. For the last 100 plus years, that's really what it has done. And it took me a long time to really fully understand this principle and how it applied in my own business. And I want to credit a podcast called the Real Estate Guys Radio, and then events that they do. And I've attended some of those events. It's a great educational, no fluff, no BS type of educational company and organization, and a few great people who run it. And I want to credit them with giving me, shedding light on this phenomenon for me. And I went back and I found a specific passage on their website that I wanted to just read to you. If the dollar is doomed to continue its 100 plus year decline, then debt and real assets are your best friend. Debt lets you pull future dollars into the present, where you can use them at today's purchasing power, which is stronger than the futures, to acquire things of real value. And then a few lines later, it says, over time, as the dollar falls, the dollar price of the property rises while the debt stays fixed. So here's the benefit to you as the owner of long-term rental property. And that's why I call this the most amazing part of owning rental properties that nobody talks about, is that when you own long-term rental property and you have long-term debt that goes with that long-term rental property, you've got something really exciting that's happening. It's probably happening in a way you can't really see, but it's happening. You know, everybody knows and everybody talks about the magic of having your tenants pay off your loan for you. And that's awesome. We all know that and we all understand that. It is indeed a fantastic force in your favor because the tenants are building the wealth for you. But when you understand how the effects of inflation are impacting your debt, you realize that you also are getting the magic of being able to lock in debt in today's dollars and pay it off in tomorrow's dollars, which is like letting the macroeconomic forces build your wealth for you. So now you've got tenants building your wealth for you. You've got macroeconomic forces building your wealth for you as well. So as always, you know, we like to be thoughtful. And I hope this helps you to be thoughtful about how you see the role of long-term deals in your business, in your world, in your life, in your portfolio versus short-term deals, because each plays a very different role with very different purposes. But the long-term deals might now, hopefully, from this podcast episode, have a different role in your mind than you even thought before. And the role of debt and financing in those long-term deals is something for you to be very, very thoughtful about. Most importantly, I hope that you can see all of these forces at work, and then you can choose thoughtfully and with intent for you to do what you think is right for your portfolio. I can tell you for myself, I intentionally acquire debt. I acquire debt that is low interest, flexible, and most importantly, long-term though. And I secure it with long-term real assets, real properties that you can go and touch, tangible, with real utility like roofs, and they keep people dry and warm and safe and things like that. But I acquire debt that's not only low interest and flexible, but it's long-term. And so in doing so, I not only let the tenants pay those loans off for me, but I let the macroeconomic forces of inflation take the sting out of that debt for me as well. Thank you for listening to Sleaze-Free Real Estate Investing. And on the next episode, we're going to be discussing what financial independence means to a thoughtful real estate entrepreneur. Please do yourself a big favor. Please do us a big favor by hitting the subscribe button in your podcast app. Also, please take a moment to rate and review the show on iTunes. It just really helps other people to find us. Give us an honest rating. If you like what you're hearing, rate it accordingly. If you don't, rate it accordingly. We just appreciate you logging a rating and a review so that the rest of the world knows what the listeners think. Reminder, today's show notes, including a transcript, are at thoughtfulre.com/E18. Until next time, this is Jeff from the Thoughtful Real Estate Entrepreneur, and I'm signing off.
Thanks for listening to Sleaze-Free Real Estate Investing. Remember, solve the person to unlock the deal, and solve the financing to unlock the profits.